Good morning, everyone. It's one of those mornings. I got all the way to Zaxby's here, and I looked over at my Bible, and this wasn't there. So I had to turn around and rush back. I mean, I probably could have done it just out of memory, but then it'd been over with in about 10 minutes. So anyway, it's good to see everybody here. I always have to start out with a little bit of a rant, I guess. And this morning, I had the TV muted, but I was just kind of looking up, gazing up to see if there was any major headlines on the news, and I saw this little segment there where they were making, I'm sure you've heard this before, but where they were making simulated meat products, in a lab. Okay, so they're doing this, and they're flipping it and tasting it and doing all that, because I can't hear the the narrative or the narration. But I see on the bottom it says, this thing will, reduce or eliminate the need for slaughter. So I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, okay, don't we have a problem with carbon emissions from cows? But we're going to make something that eliminates slaughter. Yeah, so now what? And I'm sure it's just for, the vegans to, be able to eat meat now that they don't have to feel guilty over. But anyway, I just thought that was interesting and good for a little bit of a laugh. Let's see. National championship is over. Yeah. And I saw this interesting statistic, okay, a couple days after the national championship was over, and I think it's worth noting that Alabama has more wins this year than Auburn or Clemson. Well, more wins in 2020, because Auburn and Clemson both lost in 2020. So, yeah, use that for your friends. All right. Our study today is going to be in Luke chapter 14. Still toiling along in Luke here and in looking at lost and found, losing and finding. Today's theme is going to be losing excuses not to fulfill your service to God. And it's based on the parable there of the Great Supper or the Big Feast, or however it's labeled in your headers in your Bible. Mine says the parable of the Great Supper. Okay. So, we think about, okay, so what is this? This particular parable is not to be confused with the wedding feast in Matthew chapter 22, because that's later on in his ministry. But the idea of the great wedding feast versus this one is, the great wedding feast, looks to be talking about the relationship, or maybe relationship's not the word, but the blessings, whatever, that were afforded to the Israel nation, which they kind of gave up. This here, the Great Supper, is more applicable for everybody. Not that the wedding feast isn't, but but this is a little bit more targeted as, the average folks. So let's kind of, before I get into the lesson that the author of the handout is provided, let's kind of break down this parable a little bit. Okay. All right. So as we stated, the Great Supper versus the wedding feast is a little bit more limited in is not as limited in focus. Okay, so it's kind of hitting home to those that it's applicable to. Okay, a lot of double talk there. So as we talked about last week, Jesus is invited to this supper, and then he takes the opportunity to teach his disciples about taking the lowest place, or the most humble place, as we talk about humility. And then he tells his host that he ought to invite those who cannot repay. Okay. Now, there's a little segment in there between the parable that he taught to his disciples and then him speaking to the Pharisees that invited him in verse 12 and Luke 14 and verse 12. And he also went on to say to one who had invited him, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your rich neighbors, otherwise they may also invite you in return. That will be your repayment. When you give a reception, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed, since they do not have the means to repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. So, Jesus isn't saying, hey, don't invite your friends, don't invite your family when you're hosting a big meal. He's talking about an attitude here. Don't have a big supper and invite important people that can reciprocate back to you. Do it as a kind gesture, as in hospitality and in charity, I guess, would be one word. For those who can't pay you back, okay? So, in the parable, okay, let me read that real quick. Okay, so the parable of the Great Supper, starting in verse 15. When one of those who were reclining at the table with him heard this, he said to him, "Blessed is everyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God." But he said to him, "A man is given a big dinner, and he invited many, and at the dinner hour he sent his slave to say to those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is ready now.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first one said to him, 'I have bought a piece of land, and I need to go out and look at it. Please consider me excused.' Another one said, 'I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I am going to try them out. Please consider me excused.' Another one said, 'I have married a wife, and for that reason I cannot come.' And the slave came back and reported this to his master. Then the head of the household became angry and said to his slave, 'Go out at once into the streets and the lanes of the city, and bring in here the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame.' And the slave said, 'Master, what you commanded has been done. Still there is room.' And the master said to the slave, 'Go out into the highways and along the hedges, and compel them to come in, so that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of those men who were invited shall taste my dinner.' So now the host is inviting so many people in that even if those he invited change their mind, there's not room for them. Done. You've had your chance. So you look and you see, well, okay, one has bought a piece of ground, and he's got to go see it. Who does that? Sight unseen? I'm sure it happens, but, you know, especially in this day and age, you know, in the setting of this, somebody just making an excuse. They could just easily see it the next day as they did this day, but they just wanted an excuse to not be there. Yes? You did? How'd it work out for you? Okay, so we got those that bought cars unseen. All right, now I don't have any. I got nothing now. That's a joke, okay. All right. That would kind of go more with the next one, which was the 5 oxen. He hasn't tried them out yet. All right. So again, he bought these oxen, and he's got to try them out right at this instance. Not, you know, a few hours later or the next day or whatever. It's just, again, it's an excuse not to go to the dinner. Now, as an officer in the military, I know there's a lot out there that don't consider warrant officers officers. That's all right. But in the Marine Corps, we're commissioned, just like regular officers. But there's always, they're always dipping into your pockets for something. There's always a function here and a function there, and you are required to be present for whatever it is. You know, so there's many times that I've looked for excuses to not go to these things, and some of them have been successful and some not so successful. But that's what I think of when I think of this parable, is these folks trying to get out of this feast, this supper, and coming up with excuses. The third one said he's married, and I mean, he just says he's married. Everybody, and I can't come because I'm married. All right. Would it be wrong to bring the spouse? Again, the point is the excuses that are made that are really not very good. And I read where, you know, there's a, let's see, man is given a big dinner and he invited many. And this may have been, you know, planned way out ahead, but no specific date was given. Okay, that's one theory. And then and then finally, when everything was ready, because he's been planning this for so long, he says, okay, I got it ready now. Now go out and get the invited guests. Nah, I can't be there. You know, it's inconvenient. I'm going to make up excuses, even though, you know. And again, you know, for him to go out and plan this and to just say he prepared the food, he did all of this, and it took a while to get it prepared. It took a while of planning and preparation, and then when it was finally done, even though it was, you know, this is a time when people couldn't just go down to the local supermarket and get what they need the day before and have a, you know, say, I'm going to set this dinner at this date, Okay, first of all, did they have calendars and watches and times like that? No. So things, in our frame of reference for this particular, our time versus that time, it's quite different. So it took preparation, it took planning. If there was meat, they had to gather up the animals, whatever they were going to slaughter, all this kind of thing. So once that was all done and prepared, then he could go out and say, all right, it's ready. Everybody that I invited, it's ready, come on in. Okay? So the point I'm trying to make with that is, these people that he invited ahead of time had to have committed. Okay, let's just throw that into the scenario. I know this is a parable, but consider for a second that, all right, he went out and invited these folks ahead of time, and based on, just like any other, when we send out, when we do some kind of party and we send out an RSVP, we get the answer back, and that's how you plan for how much food and drinks and whatever, based on the number of people who have committed to coming. Well, again, our frame of reference is different than the setting here, where, these people committed, the host prepared all of this, and then they made up excuses not to show up. Who knows? I mean, again, it's parable, but you could go through a lot of things of why they could have made up the excuses. Maybe just because of the way things were. Just, he just happened to have everything prepared at a time when people just didn't want to go. I don't know. But the idea is that they committed. They said, yes, I'll be there. I mean, it doesn't say that, but we can assume that. Yes, I'll be there. Tell me when it's ready. And, okay, it's ready. No, I can't come. So all that stuff is prepared, and now he has to find others, and he used it to the benefit of the poor and the lame and such. Okay, so those people that weren't invited initially, that didn't make excuses, got to benefit from the blessings of this great supper. All right. So you got to, and again, biblical salvation application. You can say that not everybody that's invited are going to partake in the blessings that have been prepared. I mean, the invitation was basically went out when Christ was resurrected, and the gospel was fulfilled in his death, burial, and resurrection. So there is the invitation to follow the Lord, but it doesn't mean everybody's going to take it. All right? All right. So let's get into a little bit of the handout. Okay, so when it comes to, again, back to the theme, losing excuses for fulfilling our service. Okay, so we put on Christ, we've accepted the invitation, we've given our RSVP, if you will, that we're going to be there. and then somehow something comes up where excuses are made not to fulfill our service. Okay, so what's the greatest commandment? Love God? Yeah, love the Father with all our heart, all our mind, and all our soul. Okay. We're also to love our neighbors as ourself. We're also to edify one another. We're also to assemble each and every one of us to honor God the Father and remember His Son and the sacrifice and taking of the Lord's table. But life sometimes gets in the way. And of course, this is probably not the audience to be talking all this to, but again, it's a good point. Yeah. If you didn't hear what he said, I mean, we have a great supper prepared for us every week to show the importance of it. But, some will not take the time to assemble here and take that invitation to partake in this so that we can be, sharing a meal and remembering the sacrifice of our Lord. And instead, they may do it once a year, that Easter thing. So again, we accept the invitation, we sign that RSVP, we send it back saying, I'm committed. All right? Now, we see baptized believers that come out of the water all motivated and ready to go, and then maybe not see them for again. That's as much on us as it is them. Anybody have any comments on that? I'm just kind of reading over the notes here real quick so I don't get off track. Okay. Again, this is, the Sunday morning. This is the same folks here on Wednesdays and Sunday nights and such, and it's a tough crowd to, make application to, But the point is that, there is a great blessing that's prepared for us. And it's been prepared for a long time. And it's taken, okay, so we take the parable of this great supper as we talked about before, and the preparation and the time and getting the items ready for the feast and such, and then waiting for it to be ready, and then saying, okay, it's ready, come on in. All right? Parallel that with starting in Genesis all the way to let's just say well, we'll go a little bit, I was going to say the baptism of Christ, but his death, burial, and resurrection. How's that? Okay. A couple thousand years, more. Preparation, getting everything ready. You know, I mean, it was back in Genesis when the prophecy was made that, you know, the serpent was going to get his head smote. Okay, you bruise his heel, but he'll smote your head, which is a greater injury. So we have all that preparation, over all those years, all those generations, and then we get to the Mosaic age, and now we've got a written law and a transition to now a physical thing, you know, rituals, things like that they're expected to perform up until the time of Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, and sending the disciples and the apostles out to spread the gospel. And then Peter's first sermon there in Acts chapter 2, and then the baptism of those folks. Okay? You know, so God has spent a lot of time preparing this blessing for everybody to come and accept the invitation. So now that, you know, we've accepted the invitation, we have committed, you know, then we have to watch our excuses and how valid they are for doing what is expected of us to serve the Lord. And that is really the point of this lesson here. In Exodus chapter 20, verse 3 through 5, it says, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above or in the earth beneath, that is in the water of the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them to serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, and visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me." So when we read this passage, you know, that when we put God on hold, then that's not in our best interest. You know, we're not to put anything before him, but we do. We saw what happened to the children of Israel when they disobeyed. They created a golden calf because they thought Moses was taking too long up on the mountain. And how many were destroyed because of that? And then generations got punished in the wilderness not to see the promised land. So we can't make excuses because God is a jealous God and doesn't want to have anything put before us. And you see the examples there. Okay, I bought land. I have an oxen. I have a wife. All things that, okay, in the case of the spouse, he could have brought his wife, probably. But, putting what we own before God, putting other things before God. Since I mentioned the word jealous, okay, here's something that, the little stumbling block that the world tries to throw out, at least with me, in years past. Jealousy is a sin. Why does God say he's a jealous God? Okay, well, first of all, if you don't believe in God, then what difference does it make what Scripture says? Okay, but anybody tell me the difference between envy as a sin in biblical writing? What's the difference between jealousy and envy? Anybody know? Well, when God says, don't put anything before me because I'm a jealous God, the jealousy described here is simply the fear of losing one's affection. That's God doesn't want to lose our affection to him over something else or even someone else. Okay? Envy is basically, I hate you because you have something that I don't. Or I hate you and I want what you have. Or, you can make any number of scenarios on that. But when God says he's a jealous God and says he doesn't want any other gods before him, he doesn't want any idols, he doesn't want anything like that. The idols, it doesn't have to be a graven image. It can go right down to our vehicles, our land, our oxen, whatever. And what's that? Money? Well, all those, yeah, and involve money. But that's putting our affection to something before God. And that's why he's a jealous God. So this idea that the Bible contradicts itself in saying that, well, God describes himself as a jealous God, but he says jealousy is a sin. Well, you need to break it down a little bit further than that. Yes, envy is a sin. But again, when God says, any of us could feel that way. We want to lose the affection of a loved one to someone else or something else? Yeah, no. That hurts. So, anyway, rambled on about that a little bit too much. Any other comments? Okay. Just try a little discussion time here. What are some of the excuses that we use these days not to serve God? Don't have time? Okay. Anything else? Not going to serve the Lord because there's hypocrites. Yeah. That's the biggest excuse? Okay. Yeah. Hypocrites. But are those hypocrites serving God? You know, I'm not going to serve God because of the hypocrites serving God. Yeah. Yeah, I've heard, I've seen some other responses like that. One being, you're going to let a bunch of hypocrites go to heaven before you do, you know, things like that. And that's right. I mean, this goes back to a lesson we had a couple weeks ago in the subject of hypocrites. When we were talking about, ways that Satan gets his hand in there and tells lies, that I've got, when we were talking about the plank versus the spot in the eye, okay, are you considered a hypocrite for speaking out against things that somebody may be doing, even though you may be sinning yourself? Well, yeah, you might be a hypocrite if you're doing the same sin and telling somebody else not to do it, okay? But we're all sinners, We're all here to better ourselves. We're all here because we need to be here. There are those pious people in the world that, go and do these kind of things, but the families that I've been part of since becoming a Christian, I'm yet to meet somebody who thought that they were better than everybody else in the church. Hmm. Yeah, it's a privilege, not a mandatory fun thing like, officers in the military. Mandatory fun. Yep. Gotta go. I had a major tell me one time I need to get my priorities straight, because they had a full bird colonel that they wanted to go out to dinner with, and I said, no, I gotta teach Wednesday Bible class. And I'm not saying that to brag, but for one instance where I stood up, I probably, caved in probably 10 times for everyone. But I just, get your priorities straight. Yeah, that's not my priority, is a full bird colonel. Okay. Yeah, it's a privilege to be here. All right, and I'm sure everybody has had their times when they just, there's been times when I just didn't feel like fellowshipping or whatever. I didn't feel like it. I just didn't. But when I did, I never regretted it. Even when I didn't feel like doing it, and I did it. And I'm not just talking about, worship service. I'm talking about just, anything. And I miss out on more than I should, just simply because I'm not paying attention to the time or whatever, what date it is and all that. But I have never regretted being a part of a function or a worship service, even when I didn't feel like it. Okay. There are times when you got to use your judgment. You're got the flu or you got some kind of bug and you can transmit it to everybody else, then, err on the side of caution. But other than that, that's right. So, just kind of wrap this up. We have to be careful about our excuses, and don't lose opportunities to serve the Lord, and consider your priorities. Any questions, comments? Understand reasons, but not excuses. Yep. All right, thank you very much for putting up with me blabbing.